Okay, welcome. G'day and peace be unto you. So, as alluded to before, I did mention in one of my earlier videos that I'll come back and we'll look at why I've chosen the Quran. So, what was the decision behind picking the Quran versus not picking the Greek New Testament or the Hebrew Tanakh, right? The Hebrew Bible. No, this is where I've taken a very objective and a very scientific approach, like without really go into too much detail, which we'll unpack as we go forward. There's a method that you use. It's called a decision matrix. So you basically understand what values you have got, what options you've got, and you score against them. And this is one of the nice and cleanest and easiest way. And I'll my attempt is to remain as objective as possible and just walk you through this journey of why I came to this point where I thought and believe that what I wanted to do on the number 19 series or numerology exercise of trying to find and verify these patterns and on which scripture, which one would be the one that would stand the test of it with the best chance, right? So let's get into it. Now, just let's get into some definitions. Now, first of all, I'll just read out to you numerology. You can go and look it up. Numerology is the belief in the divine or mystical relationship between a number and one or more coinciding events. It is also the study of numerical value, the letters in words, names, and ideas. It is often associated with the paranormal, alongside astrology and similar to divinatory arts. That's just a Wikipedia definition. You'll find something on any other good dictionary website. So that's just definitions. Another definition that I wanted to cover is mathematics. Now, mathematics is a little bit different to numerology. Mathematics is the science of numbers and the operations, the interrelations, combinations, generalizations, abstractions, of space, configuration, and their structure, measurement, transformations, and generalizations. And I'm sure you love maths at school. So, things like algebra, arithmetic, calculus, geometry, trigonometry are branches of mathematics. So this is all known to us. We've all grown up with mathematics, but it is that branch of mathematics, the various branches of mathematics. Obviously, we are talking about more the computational stuff, right? And the relationship in relation to what the context is here. Now, in terms of the overarching question, really is why do we need proof? So we're always asking for proof. I think that's just human nature, right? We want evidence, the what we call, the very scientific evidence or some physical, seeing is believing kind of thing, or we want at least reasons to have to hold a particular view, and that's the proof we are seeking. Sometimes empirical evidence, all that sort of stuff. But you're not always going to get that in a faith system. But we still want to be able to reason, because you don't choose to be born a particular religion. You basically are born in a family and you inherit that religion. What takes a person a leap in faith to go across from, say, a faith to another, is that ability to reason. My great great grandfather would have been a Hindu at some point in time, and they made a particular leap of faith across to another domain. And there's many other reversions and conversion stories. But we as human, in our day-to-day natural sort of living, we always look for proof. We look for reason to be able to substantiate our decisions. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, I'm just going to use a quotation from there, alludes to this when the Prophet is challenged and told, like I usually get letters in my mail that people are telling me this grass is the only way to salvation and all that, and I just don't understand what their proof is. But so these challenges were also faced by the Prophet of Islam in his surrounding in Medina and Mecca, where there were people of other faith, the Jews and the Christians. So a translation of Surah to the Baqarah, the calf or the cow, verse 111, and they say, none shall enter paradise unless he be a Jew or a Christian. He is here a bit of a misogynist translation. It's meant to be a he or she. It's just a pronoun use, probably poorly placed. But anyway, and they say, none shall enter paradise until they be a Jew or Christian. Those are their vain desires. Say, produce your proof if you are truthful. So that's a very close translation. It's taken from Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation of, seeking proof for your belief. Now, the question is, the essence of this particular video is which scripture is worth the proof test. Now, why, as you have already seen my videos, I'm working on, doing numerology tests on the Quran. Why have I decided the Quran? Why not the Hebrew Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible or the Greek New Testament, what the Christians use? And I've taken a scientific approach. It's called a decision matrix, and I'll share this little insight. I'm sure you already, if you've been in these disciplines, you already know there's various ways to decide something. In an engineering approach, you do things like a technical trade-off paper. You have two options that have a wonderful product from a manufacturer, and you want various things. You have your mandatory and desirable requirements. You trade off certain things for some things, whatever your value propositions are, and then you make a decision. So that's an engineering approach. I've seen technical trade-off papers. I've written them in the past. Business approaches. So if you're running a business, which option do you take? It's an options analysis. Again, cost value proposition. You might get the greatest thing you want, but you have to pay a lot of dollars for it, and you might get the cheapest thing you want, but it just doesn't give you the functionality you're over. So you land somewhere generally in the middle where you compromise, your cost and value, what you can afford. So your cost is not cost prohibitive, as we say. So, and you look at what your return on that investment is. Also, sometimes you may invest a lot because get a lot in return. So this ROI comes into the equation as well. Now, the third example I'm going to give you in your recruitment selection process. So if you've ever been as a panel on a recruitment or a panel chair, or have been on the other side, been recruited, people go through various criteria, capability, leadership framework, various Sophia frameworks, which they use in software jobs. So IT jobs, they use Sophia framework, SFIA. And normally in government, for example, they use a thing called image, which is basically a way to score on each of those values, whether a person was inadequate, an I, or M marginal, A is acceptable, G is for good, and E is for excellent. So somebody who's scoring excellent across all the selection criteria that you're looking at, that person's got a very good chance, because in a very objective and transparent way, the most merited gets the job. So this is pretty much a one of the approaches, if you look at it. Another one in procurement practices, for example, you go to tender, you have a intent to offer to market. Several vendors will pitch in a response. So how do you then select it? So again, you're looking at the value proposition. You're looking at various aspects of that vendor, the ability to meet your requirements, how good, and do they meet all your mandatory requirements, or how well did they meet all the desirable requirements? And if they don't meet desirable requirements, what workarounds are the options they propose you? Or if there are any additional bonus things that the solution provides you. Then you look at cost and budget. How much money do you really have to get the outcome that you're seeking? And then you may have to kind of adjust those parameters. But and then you come up with usually you use a weighting score. So the thing that's most important to you, you put a higher value on it. So if there's 5 things, the first one may have a value of 30. You're looking at scoring of 100, and then others may have 20, 10, 5 even. So this way you basically come up with a weighted way of recording the capability of your supplier against each one of those, and you come up with a higher score. Very transparent, very auditable, very objective way of making that decision, right? Now, what have I done here is I've taken a very similar approach. Like if I was to be given 3 books, and I want, from a scriptural point of view, go, okay, which one could I trust the most for holding the data points within it, those things that I can analyze and say, this is as good as it was when the day it was transmitted and revealed. Now I can actually do some analysis, because if things change, there's no point doing anything, because it's just a variation. It's variable, right? It's more to trust. To do analytics on something, you have, particularly for scriptural things, you have to say, okay, that content was content A at the beginning, it remains content A. So now let's just go through the features that I think are valuable to me if I'm making this assessment. Now, the very first feature, and I'm going to call it out, is scripture in messenger's own language. Why is this important to me? The messenger for me, the prophet, the messenger, the guy who gets the communion and communication with God, they've elevated themselves above the sojourn of ordinary men. The status quo of every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Because otherwise, we all be receiving messages. So there's something about them. They become enlightened enough. They go above the threshold of ordinary men and become something special, so they can then be that chosen one. So when that chosen one is getting the message, of course that chosen one speaks a language, right? This is just a natural attribute. I'm not saying that God can't just flick a switch and then all of a sudden all languages become apparent to them. No, but there is that you have to stay true to some of the natural aspects of the world as well. So in scripture, is the scripture in messenger's own language? It's important because that messenger has raised to a level. He's now in communication with a divine being directly or through various agencies, or what you call them, visions, or you call them angels, whatever. So the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, right? Yes, so Moshe, of blessed memory, as a Jew would call it, Musa, Moses, various names for Moses, as we know, he spoke Hebrew, right? It's consensus. People generally will not disagree that he spoke an ancient form of Hebrew, and therefore the answer is yes. The scripture that the Torah and the Hebrew Bible that Jews have today, they do have it in the language of the recipient. Greek New Testament. Now, I'm sorry to disappoint my Christian friends, but no. Yeshua, Jesus, Isa did not speak. He may have spoken, he may have been bilingual, but his language, that the way he would have communicated with his fellow Nazarenes or the Galileans or his fellow Jews, would have been in the language of the day. Aramaic was his mother tongue. It's well understood by scholars. He may have spoken a little bit of Hebrew or understood Hebrew. It's their sister languages, but certainly he wouldn't have communicated to his fellow Jews in Greek. So no, there is one verse, by the way, which is preserved in his mother tongue in the Greek New Testament. The famous verse before the crucifixion scene, Eli, Eli, on the crucifixion, on the cross scene, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, or Eli, Eli, lama tarakthani, meaning, oh God, why have thou forsaken me? So that's pretty much, if you didn't know, that's pretty much the only verse that is preserved and close to his mother tongue. So otherwise, no. Now, Quran, globally and predominantly by all scholars, everyone agrees, and that no one has any doubt in this, that Muhammad spoke Arabic, and the Quran, obviously, to this day is in that Arabic language that, if you want to call it the Quraysh, Hijazi, that area, that region, regional Arabic, that's the language of the Quran. Now, second feature that is important to me in terms of finding numerical patterns and whatnot is that, does the book itself specify its own encoder? Now, it could be direct, it could be implied, it could be subtle, but I'm afraid I'm going to go no with the Hebrew Tanakh Bible, right? There's no specific reference to a encryptic encoder base level. It's not there. Greek New Testament, from all my studies and all my reading, from the day when I was a 14-year-old, having Christians knock at my door and starting to read the Bible. No, Greek New Testament, no, nothing of an encoder is self elaborated in the scripture. The Quran, yes. The number 19 specifically called out in 74th Quran verse, chapter 74, verse 30. Very, it's direct, it's cryptic, people, and it's also there in a simple sentence. Over it is 19, and then there's a very long, almost exegetical kind of revelation, talking about various things, about conjecture, about numbers and all that, and it literally is a test for men to try and go, okay. And then obviously when you look 19, when it calls out 19 and you find 19, then that's the collaboration, the corroboration, or connection you're looking for. So yes, I'm going to give it a yes on that. Parity check, or ECC, error checking and correction. This is an IT term. Basically, parity checks is like a very two second intro to parity check is it's one of the most important pieces of technology we have. Today I'm using internet, you're using computers and storing stuff and transmitting stuff. Parity checks are very layman. Let me give you 2-second introduction to that. If I'm holding 8 bits, right? The one other way to 8 bits are basically ones and zeros. That's the way computers understand numbers. Everything is a 1 or a 0. It's a high signal or a low signal, right? And anything, a character, a number, anything stored, anything transmitted is basically used in a pure binary form. Those, that's what we call binary, ones and zeros. And this is how digitization has worked. And the analog signals are gone. It's the days of digital signals. So the ones and zeros, if I give you 8 bits, and that could be a mixture of ones and zeros. So let's just go with a simple pattern: 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0. So you have 4 ones and 4 zeros. Now the parity check bit, with 1 bit, I can hold a value there saying, if there's even number of ones, let's just take this example, even number of ones in that 8 bit, I will flip that parity check to be 1. But if there are odd number of ones in this 8 bits, I'll flick that to 0. Now, anytime, whether in transmission, so in internet transmission or network transmission, that 8-bit gets to the other side, it also goes with a parity check. There's a check between the bit and the parity. If it flicks, for example, it was supposed to hold 4 ones, and the parity check was 1 to say it's an even. By the time it gets to the other side, and there was a signal loss, or something happened, a wire was kinked, or some electromagnetic radiation, something happened, and one of those ones flicked to a 0. So now we have 5 zeros and 3 ones, right? So the ones have become 3 and odd. So it's saying I'm expecting, with a parity check, I'm expecting even number of ones, but I've got odd number of ones. The system basically says I'm rejecting this. Now I want a retransmission because we have got a conflict in what I'm supposed to get with a parity and what I got. And that's not only true for transmission, over a network or all those wonderfuls that we rely on for the internet to work, or even local area networks to work, but also in storage, whether it's in storage on disk, when you get those disk failures, that's, all of those checks are firing of these based on this very simple idea, and very complex, but very neat idea of storing, instead of, you could also store the 8-bit twice. Now you're just wasting storage. So this is another way of, it's almost like duplicating data to then cross-check it. So the smarter people, much smarter than me, have come up with this idea many moons ago about parity checks and concepts like that. So in data in transit can have parity checks, which is when it's traveling and transmitting. Data in persistence, so it's storage on disk, or even in memory. So when RAM, random access memory, is processing stuff, it's putting stuff there, you can have parity checks there. So if there's a glitch in the system, or there's a loss in signal or data, then these parity checks are very useful things. Anyway, it's a long sort of winded explanation on parity check. Error checking correction is a little bit more proactive. It's checking and correcting at the same time. Now the Hebrew Bible Tanakh, I'm gonna give it no. There's no idea of that I could find. The Greek New Testament, again, look on the basis that there's no evidence that I'm aware of, I'm going to give it a no. With the Quran, yes, there is, in my opinion, and based on all the readings that I've done, at least we can say that there is a level of parity check, and we will exercise that. Now there are the 26 chapters that have various letters at the beginning, so it just doesn't mean anything. They're like what they call them, disjointed letters. Like at the beginning of Harry Potter novel, in the very first chapter, it says ABC. Doesn't mean, or AKF, and then it just goes into, okay, Harry Potter this and da 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 da. What does that AKC mean? Nobody would have a clue, right? So we'll go, okay, maybe there's some sort of encryption or something. Anyway, we've got a similar presence in the Quran. There is this idea of these mysterious initials. They are the beginning of certain chapters, and I would consider them a sense of a parity check. And of course the 19 or encoding also is a way, but I would probably leave it on its own as a coda. Now encoding level, whether there's a very strong presence of this, a universal across the board encoding, not just snippets here in a particular chapter and all that. Is it really strong? I'm going to give yes to the Hebrew Tanakh Bible, because I think there's some evidence in Psalm 72, for example, in the use of numbers 7 and 26, there is some interplay there. Greek New Testament, obviously the inheritance model that the Christians have, the old, called the Greek Tanakh, the Old Testament. I mean, I'm going to leave the two separate, the New Testament and not the Old Testament. I'm going to call it the Hebrew Bible. The Christians like it to call it old so they can abrogate the law, but they are, for the Greeks, not for the Jews. It is not Old Testament. It is their Testament. It is the Hebrew Tanakh. So we got to give respect to their scripture. And I'm going to stick just with the Christians with their Greek New Testament. And it's a no for me because I don't find any level of encoding. We're going to come to ELS a little bit later. I'm going to talk about that. Now with the Quran, yes, Quran entirely encoded. It's literally, if you pull a letter out and a verse out, it kind of starts to feel the numerical concepts that are being spoken for various works Dr. Rashid Khalifa and others have done, Sheikh Bassam Jarrad and other people on Quran Way. There is a fundamental concept of everything holding very tightly coupled and very tightly encoded, and using of number 19, number 7 and 114. Now, gematria. Now, the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, and the rabbis have this concept. I think I've read in many places that they have this concept of value base. I remember when there was this leak, somebody said one of these famous rabbis had passed away, and he had written this hidden note before he passed away. And they opened it up, and it had some words in Hebrew, and some people found it. They attributed to him. Whether he did it or not is probably quite contentious. But then some people found this and said, okay, this rabbi, as part of his passing message, wrote something in a cryptic way to say Yeshua, which means Jesus, right? Is Messiah and something like that. It has been dismissed by the Jewish people of Jewish faith. But the Christians obviously jumped onto that. Now, one of the first things they did was they started to look at gematria. What are these values of these letters and all that business? So they are well and truly aware of this weighted, valued letters idea. I'm going to give them a yes. The Greek New Testament, again, I know Roman numerals, for example, we know of them I in I 3, I make number 3, and IV is 4. So that concept is known to the Greeks as well. But in terms of the gematria in the New Testament, I'm going to have to say no. Really, there's no evidence of anyone really understanding. The other problem with gematria in the New Testament is this. You pick a RSV, you pick a Revised Standard Version or the New Revised Standard Version or the NIV or the KJV, King James. Every one of them, the English is different, right? So even within the same dominion within Catholic versus Protestants, within their own spaces, the different books, the letters change. So how can you do gematria on something that doesn't have because on the basis of the very first feature here, I'm just have to kind of say no, because how can I do it? Even if we were to trust the earliest Greek manuscripts, within them there are hundreds and thousands of variations on the small things, and they matter. For gematria, they matter. For analytics, they matter. On the big things, of course, they don't have as many variations, but there's significant variations. We know of the Johannine comma, for example, in the book of attributed to John, for example. There's verses there that are not there in the early scriptures, and when you go to Codex Sinaiticus, for example, what is sort of like the most compiled, earliest manuscripts in its, book form or scroll form at the monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai, for example. So Codex Sinaiticus, as an earlier scripture, doesn't have a lot of things like the long ending of Mark and all that. So how do you treat something that is variant in its nature? You can't even apply gematria. Even if you try to pick something that you said, okay, this is a locked-in verses of Matthew, for example. But when you go and look at the scholars will tell you, when you go and look at this credit card sizes of manuscripts that are in that Greek, there's variance between them. When you're taking a verse here, and there's so many of them, that doesn't matter. You may have voluminous stuff, quantity over quality, right? If you have tons of stuff that was just widespread in that ancient world, and there was just different because there was no control, absolutely no control. In I work in records control as well, so I know controlling a document is so important. Otherwise, you're just going to have, I can see what Uthman did for the preservation of the Islamic Quran, for example, just to make sure that these variant writings by ordinary Joes were taken out, and then a control copy was based on what the Prophet had left behind. And through the Hafiz, the tradition, the very underspoken tradition that our Islamic Imams do a poor job of saying this is oral tradition. No, it's not an oral tradition. It's just not just an oral tradition. Islam has a very, very strong verbatim memorized tradition. Remember this thing. They have 7 different recitations of the same the same basic it's the recitation styles are different, but the core letters that underpin all of that are exactly the same. The core meaning that is exactly the same. So, and this is memorized tradition. I remember talking to one of the imams. I met him one day, and there was all this burning of the Quran concept coming, and he said, look, at the end of the day, they can burn all the Qurans in the world. I have to go only to get my 3 brothers, and he himself wasn't a hafiz, as we call him, fully memorized. He probably knew 40 chapters of the 114, but his brothers, 3 of them, knew the entire Quran back to front. He said, if I just put them together, and we don't even have to go to other fellow people in any other city or whatever, these 3 brothers of mine will produce the Quran between them. And I've seen this, obviously, when you go in Ramadan, you see Muslims praying, and they, over the 30, 29 days, whatever it is, they finish the whole Quran with an imam leading and reading from the first verse of the Quran to the last verse of the Quran over those 29 days without looking. And there's people in the back that are usually what they say, give lukma, basically give, if you make an error, they correct you. And I've seen some really good hafiz over my time praying in Taraweeh, and that they hardly make a single mistake, that they need a correction from the back. So this idea that it's an oral tradition to hold that content intact is actually underrated. And these are, even with people having this, again, a strange phenomenon. A person doesn't even speak Arabic, probably doesn't even understand Arabic, but he is a hafiz of the Quran. So imagine somebody who doesn't understand Harry Potter, doesn't understand English, and that person knows how to read Harry Potter to you. It's just a crazy idea. I haven't seen it. I've never met. I've met many hafiz in my time, 50 to 100, and I've always lived in Western countries, whether it be US, Fiji, or Australia. And I've traveled in Western countries, in Italy, and probably I haven't even been to Arab countries, where there would be multitudes of hafiz, and Indonesia is the most populous Muslim nation. I haven't been there, but so I haven't interacted with these people. But we know there are hundreds and hundreds, probably millions of hafiz in Islam, which basically uphold from front cover to back cover this tradition from day dot of fully memorized, and somehow they do it. It's it's just the trust in that this is word's God, and somebody's got to be the custodian of it. And there's lots of them out there. I have not met a single Jew or a single Christian that actually has that. I've not met a single person in Christendom, for example, that has the Bible memorized, even in English. Forget about the earliest whatever they uphold as the earliest manuscripts in Greek. So for gematria to work, you've got to have the core of the book in its pure form, and if you don't have it, it's a big fail for me. But anyway, I'm being as lax as I can be to try and give some scores here to help the competition come even close to the field. Now, ELS, let's talk about ELS, equidistant letter sequence method. This is the next value, right? It's chance-based, it really is. I'm going to give the Hebrew, people have done lots of fantastic things with it, and randomly you can pick anything, right? Okay, so it's a yes for them. Greek New Testament, quite nobody's bothered, really. I don't know if anyone wants to do it, because why would you do it? Like, literally, you've got a memorized tradition. Now, I'm gonna come back to ELS in a second, because I just want to show you what ELS really means. I remember very clearly listening to Rabbi Tovia Singer around this concept of this rabbi that had passed away, and supposedly had written something, and other things that the Bible can say, like the found in the Old Testament, Jesus is God somewhere. If you take every third character, blah blah blah, some pattern, right? Rabbi Tovia Singer simply said this. And this is a very famous rabbi, a Jewish rabbi. He says, I can make the Bible say anything, right? If you want to use ELS, he could make the Bible say anything. You could take my name and make me God. Literally is what he could do, because that's so random in nature. So many pages of letters, and you pick a particular pattern, you run a computer program over it, and bang. So ELS is really overrated. But anyway, if you want to use it as a measure, people have some people are jumping on this. I'll see a lot of, for me, it's really baloney, as I call it in Australian jargon. It's rubbish. But that's just for sake of argument, for a method, a feature. Let's say ELS is there, and I'm going to score it. I'm just not going to bother to give the Quran any scores on that. Now, imitability challenge. What is this? Basically, is there a challenge to say, can you produce something like this? Some challenge to, if you distrust this from God, well, what's the challenge? Pose out a challenge. Does a book actually pose out a challenge? Neither the Hebrew Tanakh, neither the Greek New Testament has. The Quran clearly has in 5 different places, and this is my understanding. Okay, very, very, rhetorical. Very, the language of the Quran is very challenging in parts where you're going to doubt it. Produce something like it. Produces a book like it. Then it lowers it down. You won't be able to produce a book like it. Try and produce a chapter like it. You won't be able to produce 10 verses like it. Produce a chapter, and the smallest chapter is 3 verses. So how can somebody go ahead and take the imitability challenge? Nobody has really done. People who have written stuff have actually got carved out because the Arabic that they've used is poor, because the linguistic style of the Quran is just too poetic, and the poets know it. There's various the grammar that people use. This fellow who tried to do a challenge absolutely got caned for even trying. But then there's multifold layers. Now you've got to get numerical in there. You've got to be prophetic. Now you've got whatever you're going to write in the imitability challenge. I don't know what the measures are, but imagine having to write something that forecasts the future. Imagine having to write something that accurately depicts what happened in history back. And as time and revelations come up, those things have to be proven to be true. And there are these imitability challenge sits in the Quran in 5 different places. So let's go to the next slide, because I want to talk about ELS. Now, ELS, equidistant letter sequence method. Now, if you are a subscriber to this thought, let me read you a work here from Scott Duval and Daniel Hayes, 2012, Grasping God's Words, a hands-on approach to reading, interpreting, and applying the Bible, page 337. They say, the scholarly rebuttals to Bible codes have been devastating. These rebuttals have provided strong evidence that there is nothing mystical or divine about ELS. The arguments leveled against this method of finding secret messages fall into 2 basic categories, that relating to probability and that relating to textual variations. Textual variations, another flaw in the ELS approach, is that its proponents seem unaware of the variations in the text of the Old Testament. I'm going to say variations in the text of the New Testament as well. So basically it falls into the fact that it's relying on probability, just randomness of things appearing, and then you're searching, your head over heels, and you find something because it's just every 7th letter spells this out, and then it falls over if you pick another Bible, or then which one you're going to trust of all the variations you have, because you're now relying. You can say, oh, those variations are small, but those variations are small are big when it comes to one character out of place. So this is the problem with ELS, and that's not my position. These are two guys. You'll find other works as well, and as just common sense, ELS is baloney. And I will go with Rabbi Tovia Singer. You can make the Bible say anything if you're going to use ELS. Okay, now numerology, mathematics, in the same slide. What are we going to do is I'm going to wrap that up because we already covered the imitability challenge. I just wanted to show that that's where we are in terms of scoring. There's some good and bad scoring across in the Hebrew Tanakh. Pretty not so good across the Greek New Testament. Quran's pretty good across the board. I've left the ELS as unresolvable. No one's really cared, and it's worth to even care. Now, I just wanted to cover this other piece about who wrote the Bible. Matt Baker, he's a Jew, probably I understand probably a not a very religious Jew. I don't know, but you can go to his website, usefulcharts.com. Secular Jew is probably the word that he would use. He's got a PhD in education religion. Very smart guy. He's got a YouTube channel. Really recommend Useful Charts on YouTube as well. But you can go to his website. You can buy charts if you're ever looking for various charts of genealogy of different kingdoms and in the ancient times and modern times, all that sort of stuff. He does an amazing job. But he also did this piece as a Jew. He did this piece on who wrote the Bible. Okay, and he's broken it down into what we call the Torah. The Tanakh basically stands for T and K. It stands for Torah, and the Nevi'im, which is the Nabi, which is like an Arabic word meaning prophets, and then the Ketuvim, right, which is the more the prophets and the lesser writings, if you want to say more the sages and the likes. So he does this piece. There's a video actually, I think, on YouTube called Who Wrote. Highly recommended. Go watch it. And he talks about this this piece, and he breaks it down. Let's start with the Torah, the first 5 books of the Christian would call it the Pentateuch, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, traditionally ascribed to Moses. It is now held by scholars to be a compilation of texts from 9th to 5th centuries BC, and the Jewish name is Torah. So you can see clearly, I mean, the position is quite, if anyone tries to say to you that Moses wrote the entire Torah, be skeptical about it, because scholars have basically, using various techniques and understanding and let's just go through some slides so that I'll just unpack that a little bit. So Matt Baker, a very smart guy. I've watched a lot of his videos, and I've been on his website. I haven't bought any charts, but he positions this. So it's good to have a look at the left side and the right side. You can see the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, has 3 categories: the Torah, the Nevi'im. Nevi'im is a very similar word to the Arabic Nabi, means prophets, and Ketuvim, again, more of those other miscellaneous writings. So 3 categories. The Christian Old Testament, like they want to call it the Old Testament because they have the New Testament now, right? The New Testament books are not shown here because we're talking about what the Christian representation of those are. They also have the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books. Then the history, they have a section called the history. There's extra books in here, and the grade ones are also the differences between the Protestants and the Catholics. You have poetry and prophecy as one of the other breakdowns. So there is some overlap between them, but the actual words in them are different because the Christian Old Testament is based on a translation way back, whereas the Jews still have what they call the earliest Hebrew version of their Tanakh, right? So it's not 1-to-1, and also there's differences in books as well, and in fact in readings are also different. Okay, now this Matt Baker basically, talks about these 3 theories that scholars have about the authors of the Bible, and they're grouped in instead of looking at Moses as the writer, because at the end they talk about Moses died in the land of Moab, and nobody knows where he was buried. So you can clearly see that Moses didn't write that. So they jump up and say, no, Joshua wrote that, and then they continue with it. But anyway, a long story short, or Aaron wrote it, or somebody else wrote it. It just basically, it's a way to kind of correct the narrative, to say, how could somebody write their own death? They died and got buried and all that business, right? And in a very natural sense, it's an anomaly. I'm not sure if it's an anachronism, but nonetheless, it's something that doesn't sit well with scholars. So this is what they've done. They say there's 4 schools of thoughts of writers. These are the 4 types of writing that they're able to identify and call them the Jaoist, which is basically Jehovah-based, Elohist, the people that usually use the Elohim references, Deuteronomist, and priestly. Those 4 colors, and you can see on the first 5 books there is a slicing of authorship on Genesis across the board, except there's no writings from Deuteronomist on it. Exodus, and the black ones are what they call the core parts. I believe there's some commonality. Leviticus, for example, is predominantly the priestly school of thought, right? So group of users and a group of thinkers and of the priestly class pretty much wrote the Leviticus and maintained that. Numbers is again made up of very little of Jehovahist in there, but a lot of priestly class, and Deuteronomy predominantly written by the Deuteronomist school of writers, right? And then the thought was Deuteronomist in nature. So that's theory 1. Then they talk about this, the northern kingdom and Judah, kingdom of Judah and kingdom of Israel, and the history of the Jews. They pretty much get decimated by all these trials and tribulations in their history. The fall to Assyria and the Babylonian exile when Nebuchadnezzar comes in, and they have that original leaving Jerusalem and getting out during the famine times to Egypt, and then Exodus back and all that business. So the Torah is basically according to this hypothesis, the documentary hypothesis. You can watch Matt Baker; he does a much better explanation than I would ever do, and he talks about that at various phases, this different writing comes in, and how the Torah is formed around the Second Temple time and really formulates. So it's actually a evolving piece. It has some core elements, but that oral Torah gets translated into written Torah and expanded upon. So there's all this extra, added onto it through understanding, I would imagine, is what they're saying. Now, the supplementary hypothesis is a little bit different. They talk about, that both the northern and southern kingdoms existed at separate times, and then the Babylonian, the fall to Syria happened, and the Deuteronomy started their work, and that Babylonian exile happened, and then the Jehovah's and the Elohis combined writings happened. Now they have a theory here of a redactor style where people were removing stuff and adding stuff and all that business. So the redaction happened somewhere around the Second Temple time to end up with what the Torah is. Now, the third theory, I think the dual origins hypothesis. Matt Baker is a bit of a fan of this. I think he quite not fan. I think he likes this hypothesis because it makes more sense. Perhaps I'm not the researcher in this field, but he talks about this dual origin stories, the three patriarchs, that story. That's why things a little bit different. And they have the Moses origin story, more Egypt, Exodus based. So then the writings come together in different ways between those groups that are separated, and eventually they bring the Torah together when when the northern kingdom collapses and they move down. So that's when the Torah actually finds its form that they currently have. So there's a little pretty picture that he did of the complete history of the Israel people, and it's talking about the Torah and then the former prophets. And there is an element of this thing called a code within each of these writings, and there's almost like the body upon the bones upon which the muscles and the flesh was grown upon. So on the covenant code, you can almost believe that Moses got the Ten Commandments. That was the essence of his belief system. Then things were added onto it through whether there were sages and thinking, various thought processes led to the evolution, if you like, of these books. But there seems to be some essence of some code embedded in, for example, in Deuteronomy. They call it the Deuteronomy code, which is quite, quite perhaps closer to the origin, perhaps, of whoever was the recipient, whichever prophet it was. And then the other stuff is a little bit more expanded upon, more evolved and composed over time. But that's his take, Matt Baker's take on it, and obviously there's a lot of scholarly work in this space to just show people that you can't just go and a lot of people are using books of gods and saying men wrote them, but they ascribe them to God. But this isn't the case based on what Matt Baker is showing here. There's some good stuff in the core, but the fluff around is probably what people did. So 4 schools of thought, 4 schools of writing is, and those 4 colors that are presented there is generally understood to be who wrote the Bible. And we're talking Bible, we're talking about the Tanakh, and obviously the New Testament has its own story. Now, apologies for that little digression. I just wanted to go and have a look at that. I do recommend go and look at Matt Baker's YouTube channel. Go look at his website. I know he's obviously a PhD and a smart man, and has done his research. Now let's look at these scores that I've therefore done. Is scripture in Messenger's own language? I spoke about this. I'm going to cut it really short. I'm going to score 25% for the Hebrew Tanakh, because the Bible, as we see today, we understand that Moses and the prophets, the Hebrew prophets, would have spoken Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, but nonetheless 25 out of 25 from my point of view. The Greek New Testament, I'm going to give it a 1 because I hate to give it a 0. Quran 25 specifies its own encoder. I believe it's a high value thing, so that's why it's getting a high rating of 25. What do you give out of 25? I couldn't find any example of a self describing encoder in the Tanakh. Nothing per se in the Greek New Testament. The Quran, definitely there's a line clearly states, and even the first revelation is 19 words, so and the encoder itself says above it is 19, so there's a lot of work done around 19 for the Quran, so I'm going to give it 25. Parity check, out of 10, it's a mid value. It's something that is probably a new science. Probably people need to do more work on it. I'm going to give 5%, 50%. The Hebrew Tanakh Bible, it's just got a sense there's probably something there. I just feel probably Psalm 72 has something. Greek New Testament, again, how can you do a parity check on something that's not even in its original form? So the original messengers language form. So I'm going to give it a 0. The Quran, I'm going to give it 10 out of 10 because I get a sense that these mysterious initials have something to do with how things are within the chapter that it has, and probably across relation as well, and probably other things that I'm confident that it can be investigated at least. So I'm going to give you the possibility that's there. Encoding level, low, medium, or comprehensive out of 10. Hebrew Tanakh. Look, there are several chapters, several areas where you possibly think that there is possibilities of moderate level of encoding at least. So I'm going to score it really reasonably high, 7 out of 10. Greek New Testament, I'm just going to give 5 because the possibility is endless. So, but there's no real sign in my head, none that I've seen, none of that read. I'm going to give it a 50%. Quran, I'm going to give it 10 because that encoding that I spoke about before seems quite spread. It seems quite interlocking as well. Gematria values with the phenomenon of weighted numbers. I think the Hebrew and the rabbis that have knowledge of this, they have done some works on it. Kabbalah is a totally different thing, but nonetheless, there is a good understanding of gematria for at least the Israelites. So I'm going to give it a 10 out of 15, and I'm also similarly going to give Quran a 10 out of 15 on that mid value. Now with the ELS, like I said, it's low value. It's really I've just thrown it in there to give the Greek New Testament something, because that's what a lot of people on the internet and other places are just randomly finding stuff, and it's just like I say, it really upholds no real, it's chance based, and I don't like that kind of stuff. It needs to be more consistent. It needs to be more pattern based for my kind of liking, and it just doesn't have it. But I'll just give it a 4 out of 5 anyway, just so that get it out there. I'm not going to give anything to the Quran because I don't think people even bother with the ELS with the Quran. You could find anything like the same thing. It's just randomness, right? Immutability challenge and nothing. It's a moderate value, 10%. I haven't seen anything in the Tanakh Bible, but there's no challenging statements like produce something like it, or if you don't trust this, go ahead and do this. A falsification test. None of that sort of stuff exists in neither the Greek Tanakh, the Tanakh or the Greek New Testament. The Quran does have it in multiple places. There's 5 verses that I have researched that clearly throw out a challenge, and obviously there's multiple other places where the challenge to not reproduce, but the challenge to falsify is also there. So this immutability challenge is a little bit different, not falsification. I'm going to score it a strong 10. So what's the score? What do we get? So in a nutshell, wrapping up this video, I get 90% for the Quran in terms of its worth. I'm not saying this is what it's 1 out. This is worth its potential to be examined because of these features that I'm looking for to proof test anything that with those features that are basically the underpinning of quality that requires possibility of further exploration. So 90% for the Quran. Hebrew Tanakh, it's a credible 51%. Sorry, the Greek New Testament's at 10%. Now, in conclusion, on claims of numerological mathematical encoding, the Quran is placed way ahead, as we just saw, amongst the Middle Eastern Abrahamic faith scriptures. The Hebrew Tanakh Bible, for me, is a commendable second place. The New Testament is third. Just to allow for some subconscious, unconscious, preconceived bias that I might have, with my affinities and my background, I'd probably just throw in, as objective as I believe I have been, I'm just going to throw in a plus 10 minus percent, right? So with that, Quran is still 20%. And what I mean by that is if Quran scored 90%, I'm going to take 10 off for my subconscious bias, right? Gets to 80. The Hebrew Bible, Tanakh, is at 51. Throw another 10, make it 61. New Testament is 10%. And I usually don't do this when I do a decision matrix, but just so that people don't see this as an overly biased system, you can see it's still 80, 61, 20. That is still a gulf between in terms of decision matrix. That's when I do decision matrix on procurement and recruitment and other things, I see very close marks. It's very it's usually 5% here and there, but that sort of gulf is really clearly for me a foregone conclusion. So what do we do next? This is my approach. The gold medalist winner, as I'd put it, you take it and you put it to the test, right? You do a recruitment exercise and you come up with merited candidates 1, 2, and 3. What do? You hire the number one candidate. In procurement, what do you do when you have selected somebody as your number one, and particularly there's a gulf between the first and second supplier in your decision matrix? You basically go and hire that supplier, right? So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the gold medalist winner and this decision matrix, my own, based on my understanding, my rationale, my logic, which I hope is very common sense. But I'm obviously going to get paved for bias, but that's what humans do. What's next? Can his claims be verified or can the claims be debunked? So we're going to take the Quran and then we're going to put it to test. All those things that people are claiming about it. Now, there are going to be people that are going to make mistakes. People are going to make wrong claims. People are going to make right claims. But the essence of it should flow up at some point in time, saying what people are saying about these numerology or mathematics is either totally flawed or there's an element to it and there's probably some correction of it. I don't know what it is. I don't know. We can't preempt where we're going to land. So in the next series of videos, I'm going to use SQL verification techniques. This is very, very down to the data level verification, actual data query and analysis. So that's the approach. And very last slide. And again, I want you to be, for those that have been offended through this, my apologies, but there's no intent like that. My channel is about I reason, therefore I am. I'm a person of a diaspora. I am a person of multi-faith in my tradition and my ancestry and all that business. So I need to be able to, for my own sanity and in the mire that we live in, be able to help people find the truth. And for me to be able to then use things that are valuable to me in my decision-making process, in my understanding of faith and the world as I see it and what values I place on it. And I can be objective about it. A birthright is a birthright. You can be born like anything. You can be born, in PNG and be an animist, or be in PNG in some other part and be Christian, or whichever islands. In the islands, you could be a Muslim, or you could be a Jew, or a Christian, or Hindu, for example. You could be doing idol worship. Who knows? If your forefathers are born with that, then you're going to have that faith system in you. But if you're going to take that leap of faith to say, look, I want to be able to stand on my own 2 feet and make a decision. You could be a black sheep in your family that are doing stuff like that, but I am one of those, and I encourage you to take to heart this approach about I reason, therefore I am. This whole idea that I think, therefore I am is a little bit different to that. It's about reasoning to arrive at a conclusion. And any feedback, any comments, any suggestions, I'm happy to take this on. I know this is a little bit of a controversial sort of videos, but it's not aimed to be at that. It's aimed to explain my decision on why I have chosen to take on this challenge to do these SQL verifications on the Quran first. And if I ever get out of that and I have a look at what's happening in the Tanakh and probably won't even really look at the New Testament based on the results I've seen today. But that's just my view. I'm not meaning to be disrespectful. I'll be as respectful and considerate to others as I certainly can be. And Like again, we're all here to learn. I'm learning. I hope you have learned something today. That's all from me. Peace be unto you. Good night.